Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Smith, President and CEO of Airlink. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Flightpath. Here we aim to highlight innovation, deliver insight, actionable guidance, and lessons in best practice to people working in the humanitarian response and disaster logistics space, all from experienced organizational leaders. And don't forget to please like and subscribe to the channel. So my guest today is former CEO of Pacific Tank Lines, a nationwide full-service petroleum carrier with customers such as Shell, Chevron, Marathon Petroleum Company, BP, Phillips 66, Unocal, and other major oil companies. And in addition to his roles at Pacific Tank Lines in the Fuel Relief Fund, topic of our discussion today, Ted is also involved with a number of other fuel industry organizations, including the California Trucking Association, Private Fleet Council, the CFCA, California Fuel and Convenience Alliance, Gold Coast Builders Association, and Commercial Builders. He's a busy guy. Now, in 2005, in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, he began a new venture, providing free fuel to disaster-affected communities. This project quickly developed into what is now known as Fuel Relief Fund, of which he's the founder and chairman of the board. And nearly 2 decades later, Fuel Relief Fund is an organization with a global reach and impactful partnerships, including a number of agencies of the United Nations. Ted Honcharik, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
That's great. So Ted, thanks for joining me. Tell me a little bit about Fuel Relief Fund for those that might not be familiar, and tell me a little bit about what you do and why it's so important.
Fuel Relief Fund is the only nonprofit organization in the world that provides free fuel, mainly after major natural disasters. We've been to just about every major natural disaster around the world for over a dozen years. But we've also grown into helping in situations such as Yemen and Ethiopia and here in Ukraine as an operational support partner of the United Nations, and getting them prepared and fuel acquisition, inventory management, distribution, safety and controls. But the key thing about Fuel Relief Fund, is I always say, is nothing happens without fuel. We always try to be the first organization on the ground, because, and thanks to Airlink, that it enables us to do that, and, even in the United States. But without fuel, the hospitals aren't running, the search and rescue people aren't operating, generators, water, fuel, medicine, nothing happens without fuel. And most people don't realize that unless they've experienced living through a natural disaster. But we've always found that, obviously food, water, shelter, and medicine are very, very important. But it doesn't happen without fuel. And on anybody's list in a disaster, rated number one always, at least number 1 or 2, but number 1 overall. Fuel is always the number 1 thing needed.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I mean, tell me, you're calling me from Kyiv today, right? We put in an Airlink, and we're very proud to support you and your team in Ukraine. Tell me a little bit more about how fuel becomes so important. I get it, nothing runs without fuel, but how does it become? Why is it so important, and what happens? And maybe you can talk also a little bit about what you've been doing in Ukraine and some of the challenges you've had.
Every disaster is in a lot of ways the same, although it's not just about gasoline and diesel. But to touch on that first, food can't be delivered in these trucks unless fuel is in it. Hospitals don't run without the generators running, and the only way that runs is with diesel in those. But in the United States, we'll have lines, a couple of miles long, or if we're just giving it to the public directly, sometimes we'll have people stand in line for 4 or 5 hours just for 5 gallons of fuel, so they can keep their small Honda generator running, so that they can keep the refrigerator cold, so that their food doesn't spoil. But we've done a lot of other things, such as in Ecuador. We did propane there. We recognized that we're able to touch tens of thousands of people because every family there cooks with propane. And once a month, they'll deliver a 15-gallon propane tank. And that'll supply a family for a whole month to be able to cook with. And so the economics were perfect. We always want to try to touch as many people as possible. But for instance, in Nepal, we were providing fuel again to equipment and generators. But then like in the Philippines and Nepal, there were water treatment plants that weren't able to operate, or the Red Cross set up portable water treatment plants to sometimes provide for tens of thousands of people just fresh drinking water. And it could be as small amount as 500 gallons of diesel, but that enables now that community to have fresh water that didn't have it after that disaster struck.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, understood. And so, but why does fuel become so important? It, obviously, just such a massive in the aftermath of these these situations. There's just a massive surge of demand, and supply chains disrupted, and so it can no longer be delivered, and therefore, that's why you get this, sort of unbalanced universe.
Well, you have a few things happen when a disaster occurs. One, obviously, power. You lose electricity. Then a lot of these gas stations don't even have the generators to pump that fuel out. But immediately now you have roads that are closed, debris everywhere. People are trying to just get out from underneath the destruction and build home again. But it takes time for the roads to even be cleared, for tanker trucks to even get in, but they can't even take them to a gas station because that gas station is either destroyed or doesn't have electricity going to it, or even its generator may need powering. We try to get the fuel from the closest source possible. A lot of people ask, where do you bring the fuel from? Most of the times in the United States, within a couple 100 miles, we're usually able to bring fuel in. But Mozambique, we were having to travel, 400 or 500 miles to bring fuel. In the Bahamas, when we landed there after the hurricane a few years ago in the Bahamas, when we arrived, these are islands. So it's not like you could just bring truckloads of fuel from another island. And we immediately, we try to plan ahead, recognizing what the problem is going to be. And we already had a ship loaded with hundreds of barrels of fuel. And when we landed in the Bahamas, it took a few days for that ship to get there. But in the meantime, we were communicating with the local marinas that we know that they had fuel underground, but the marinas were destroyed, but we were taking the top layer of that fuel that were in those underground tanks to get the UN operating, the World Central Kitchen operating, to get all the local NGOs operating until that ship came in with all those barrels. And then from there, the beauty of it is since we are the only ones that provide fuel, we get so much support, because every one of these agencies and that are suffering, the amount of support that they want to give us, because they can't believe there's even an organization that does this. They just want to turn around and help as well. So, we have partners all over the world now and volunteers all over the world that whenever there is a disaster, I get phone calls from many people that just want to come and help, give back, donate funds, whatever it may be. But in the Bahamas, it was a great example of how so many people came together helping each other on an island that, whether it be food, water, shelter, medicine, all that stuff had to be brought in. But we even had the Dutch military fly into the airport where we were staging all of these barrels and asked how they could help. And I met them at the airport, and I said, I pointed over to all those drums, and I said, we need to get those flown to the outer islands where all of these people were stuck without food, water, shelter, medicine, but they needed fuel for those generators, just to provide light. Earthquake in Haiti, where I say it for every disaster, even if you're in the United States, if your neighbor has a generator and he was able to secure some fuel, or he prepared ahead of time, and there's a light at the end of your street, nobody else has any light, I promise you, every evening, everybody is going to come to the light. And then they just start, people, neighbors that they didn't even know, end up becoming best friends because they just all end up helping each other. But it's all because they followed the light. And light provides that security as well. Without light and complete darkness, you don't feel though there's much hope. And if you can provide a little bit of light, you provide a lot of hope.
I like that. Well, so Ted, tell me a little bit about your program in Ukraine and some of the challenges you've been facing, if you would.
Well, normally we don't. I mean, we have, like I said, helped the UN with contract things and setting up plans for distribution, as in Yemen and Ethiopia. But this was a different situation. In the very beginning, it wasn't something that Fuel Relief Fund was going to respond to and start providing free fuel to. But we were asked by our operational support partner, the World Food Program, if Fuel Relief Fund would come out. We came out in the very beginning, helped them set up contracts with the local fuel companies, how we could possibly bring fuel in from Poland and where it would be staged, and then placing fuel in strategic locations. So if things got bad, their personnel had the ability to evacuate. But after doing that and leaving and talking to my board members and my executive director, I felt as though that there was a real need for the NGOs, the international ones, as well as the local ones here in Ukraine, that they needed assistance. Fuel was very difficult to come by, even in the areas like Kiev and Lviv, where there hasn't been, since the first couple of weeks. And although there's still missiles flying every once in a while, it's not frontline stuff. But we were getting requests from Doctors Without Borders, the International Medical Corps, and even WFP and others and local NGOs that were providing food, water, shelter to the communities that were just hunkered down, hoping that this would not last. So we've been, working very hard, providing tens of thousands of liters of fuel to all of these type of organizations that are more east towards the conflict. I mean, obviously, we don't want to get into a position that we're supporting the military, although I, completely believe in what the Ukraine military is doing and support that. But, it's not our role to provide the fuel. But obviously, there's tremendous amount of civilians suffering that don't have electricity, don't even have the means, even if fuel was available now, to even purchase it. It's no different than any disaster in the world, that there's most people live paycheck to paycheck, or maybe have a month's worth of savings, and that gets burned through quite quickly. And to have to go spend a day driving to one location, stay in line for days just to get a limit of 5 to 10 gallons of fuel is very difficult on many families.
Yeah, I bet. Well, part of this podcast, we talk about, leadership. And so let me kind of change lanes a little bit. You work with a lot of volunteers, and obviously, fuel is if you don't treat it properly, is a fairly dangerous product. You as a leader of the organization, how do you manage the risk of your volunteers and just generally of your operation?
Fuel Relief Fund, for me, is the only organization I know of that has one paid executive director who should be paid double what she is paid, and an assistant who should be double paid what she's paid. Everyone else in the organization are volunteers. But most of my volunteers have been to multiple disasters with me over the years. Boston firemen with former military background, doctors, doctors that have deployed with me that love giving away fuel. They'll even call as soon as there's a natural disaster and say, "Are we going? I want to go." Because the beauty of the organization also for us, which makes it, I hate to say this, but enjoyable, is that obviously we can't just put fuel in one place and have all these people come to us. We need to bring it to them. But all of our people are, highly trained in the distribution, the safety, the security of doing this. We end up, we can't fuel all day long and then leave and drive 100 miles to find a hotel. Lots of times we're staying in a firehouse, or we're staying in a tent. We have to stay next to our trucks. And then every day, what we really try to do every evening, when we're doing something in the United States, but to move to another location, try to, touch as many people in the hardest hit areas. And the amount of fuel, even in the United States, that we've provided to fire engines, ambulances, the police. I mean, obviously, we want to help all those first responders first. We want to make sure that the hospitals and clinics and water treatment plants have fuel. Then we want to help the local NGOs. And what's really wonderful for the United States is FEMA and the local communities, especially that are in disaster prone areas, have plans in place that, try to take care of those things as much as possible. But it's these small communities that don't get that kind of attention, don't get it right away. But once we have that flowing and them satisfied, the one thing that all of us as volunteers love to do the most is give the fuel directly to the people.
That's great. That's great. And those are communities that are, need a lot of help, I know. So tell me a little bit about, you are not only, currently the chairman, but you're also the founder of Fuel Relief Fund, right? And 2005, so that's 17 years, right, of the organization. And maybe you can talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges you've faced over that period. I'm sure we don't have enough time today to talk about all of them, but some of the key challenges you face and how the organization sort of developed and what you've had to overcome.
Just the reason I got involved with it is my family went through Hurricane Andrew in Miami back in the day, and I was in California. And I was in the fuel business, but I just started and I didn't have really the funds to really help them. I was trying to start my own for-profit business back in the day. But I remember visiting Miami a few months later to visit my family and friends that I grew up with. And I can't remember a friend or family's house or vehicle that didn't have at least tens of thousands of dollars in damage. I even had a sister that lost her house completely. So Hurricane Andrew happened in Louisiana. My wife and I were, Katrina happened in Louisiana back in the day. I remember my wife and I were sitting in bed on a Sunday morning, drinking coffee and watching the news. And all those people in line for fuel for hours. And I told her if there's a way that we could raise enough money to fill up one of my tanker trucks, I would have one of my drivers drive it all the way to, and that's what happened. Even my largest competitor at the time, I even called him and asked him if he'd be willing to donate. And I had only raised enough money to fill up half of the tanker. And he said, how much are you short? And I said, half the tanker. And he said, I'll make up the other half. So we immediately deployed and started in Pascagoula, Mississippi, just me and one driver. And every night we moved the truck to another location, working our way towards New Orleans. Hurricane Rita happened after that. And it was such a success. I came back, my CFO said, Ted, you love doing this so much. Why don't you start a nonprofit organization? And so I called my attorney, and he thought it was a great idea. And I said, well, if you don't mind being one of the board members, that would even make me happier. And he agreed. And from there, we just, it was Haiti. And so many stories from every disaster. I could talk to you for hours of the special stories that each location. But the challenge truly, and you'll hear it from every nonprofit organization, it's always about funds. Mm-hmm. But, there's so many organizations that give away food and water, shelter, and medicine, and so many of them are funded well, and as they should be, 100%. But people just don't, I've said this before, fuel just doesn't sound sexy. But if they only realized how important it was, and how much it helps all these other organizations provide that food, water, and shelter, that's the most difficult part. Finding the fuel, distributing the fuel. Yes, those are all challenges, logistical problems, but that's what we do. That's what we like to do. That's why we enjoy doing it. It's the raising the funds part that is, always the challenge.
Yeah, it sure is. I think we're in a similar space. Airlift. Nobody gets too excited about that unless they need it. And obviously, you've had a lot of exposure to, personal exposure to the impacts of shortage of fuel, and so and it sounds like you've built a great partner network over time. And just give me quickly, if people are interested in supporting, what your website is.
It's www.fuelrelieffund.org.
Great. So tell me, as you look to the future, you've mentioned that you now have a really good stable of partners that are supporting. Talk to me a little about how you're seeing the future of Fuel Relief Fund. Some of the challenges, opportunities come up in what does the future look like?
Being in the fuel business for 30 years, even getting the major oil companies to get involved, it's been a little bit of a challenge. The major oil companies will write that check to the big organizations that we all know who they are, and unrestricted funds. And I always say that water companies give away water, food companies give away food, possibly airline companies provide a little bit of help on your side. I don't really know.
Oh, yeah, they sure do, big time. Yep, they sure do.
But and that's what it's all about. And we definitely have been some serious and from the major oil companies. One of them, Chevron, has stepped up in a big way. The last hurricane in Louisiana that we responded to a couple of years ago, I believe, they supported us with tens of thousands of gallons of fuel that we distributed in a few locations. And from that, they're starting to plan ahead now, and they want to support us in any of the Gulf states, starting now with fuel. So we even have partners like Suncoast out of Texas, which is one of the largest petroleum distributors in the area, that do a lot of work for FEMA and those groups in providing fuel for the emergency responders and stuff. But for years, they've donated a truck and a trailer to us multiple times. So the equipment is donated to us. Now we have Chevron donating, part of the fuel that we're distributing in these areas in the Gulf Coast of the United States. So, it's after every disaster, it seems like we just get the message out there a little bit more. You prove yourself a little bit more. People start to recognize the value a little bit more. And I have nothing but wonderful feelings as into where this organization continues to go. Truthfully, I wish there was 5, 10 other fuel relief funds, run by other organizations. It's so needed. And it's so needed all over the world right now, especially with the crises that are going on today, post-COVID, what's going on here in Ukraine. A lot of people starving all over the world. Sri Lanka can't even afford fuel right now. There's places in Asia, Africa that could use, fuel, not just for gasoline and diesel as winter happens, for heating. For the tsunami in Japan, it was in the middle of the winter, and the government asked if we could provide kerosene to all these Japanese people. Same with Van Turkey earthquake. That was coal. Mm-hmm. These aren't the green things that people, want to see. And unfortunately, I'm the first one. As soon as we can go green, solar power, whatever, in a disaster, I support that 100%. I would love to see that somehow handle everybody's needs in these disasters, but that's just not the case right now. And, fuel is so important. It's food and fuel around the world right now, especially.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously, it's very clear that you've built a very impactful organization, and oftentimes work behind the scenes. You've probably helped, thousands and thousands of people that probably didn't even know that you were there and helped them behind the scenes. And so, that's really great. And I appreciate you covering and telling us all about Fuel Relief Fund. It's really great what you're doing. It sounds like you've got some great partners. Ted, I think that's probably all we have time for today. I just want to, thank you for your time. I really appreciate everything, you and your team are doing. All of your volunteers, we're very excited and proud to support you in any way we can. All I would say to my listeners, please be sure to join me next time, and please like and subscribe to Airlink's channel. And until next time, from Washington, D.C., this is Steve Smith wishing you and your family good health and clear skies. Goodbye.
Thank you.